Hey, Doug here. I'm out in the shop working on my How to Reupholster a Bench Seat series, and I felt like this topic kind of deserved its own video. So today we're going to be talking about sew foam, the different types of sew foam, thicknesses, how to use it, when to use it, where to buy it. Also talking about perimeter sewing your panels and how to reduce bulk in your seams. So stick around. So I use sew foam in just about every panel of every project that I work on the automotive side of upholstery. I feel like it's something that really elevates the quality of my work. Everybody has their own preferred way of using it. Some people like it glued, some people don't. And I just want to say there's really no right or wrong way to use it. As long as you're meeting the goals of your project or for your customer, it really will be something that you'll be using all the time once you start using it. So when you buy your sew foam, it's going to be ordered by the yard. And so it's going to be 36 inches by about 58 or 60 inches per yard. And you're going to usually buy it 10, 15 yard increments, or you're going to buy a whole giant roll for several $100s. And you're going to go through a lot of it. Generally, when I'm ordering sew foam, I just get a 1/4 inch. And if I want something really plush, like on the top of a seat of an old Buick or Cadillac or something like that, I'll buy a 1/2 inch sew foam. And also foam is just a fabric-backed foam. So when you're sewing through the foam, the fabric will stop the thread from ripping it up and you won't have a lumpy seat. But what it also does is it gives you a nice layer of cushion. So when your vinyl or your leather panels, it gives a really plush, luxurious feeling. But the sew foam also will hide any lumps that you have in your seat, any unevenness, any little small dips and valleys. It's really going to elevate your work and hide the imperfection in the foam. As you know, most of the time we are not replacing full foam, especially restoration work. Sometimes you might just do a small foam repair. Foam gets very expensive, so not every customer wants to replace all the foam. And so it's a good way to kind of gap the having a nice restored seat with trying to reuse as much of your old material as possible. Probably the most asked question I get about sew foam from my students is which way does the sew foam go? And so you're going to take your vinyl material or your leather, your cloth, whatever would be on top, and then it would go foam, and then on the back you're going to have your cloth material. Now, the good sew foam, when you buy it, is going to have t-shirt backed, and it's really not t-shirt. It's probably woven in the same way that a t-shirt is woven, but it's a really thin material. You'll also see on some cheaper varieties of sew foam, it's like a netting, and I recommend not wasting your money on the netting stuff. It just doesn't hold up well, doesn't stick. I pulled this piece off here, but you have to really fight to get this off. On the cheap netted variety, it comes right off. It's really an inferior product. One of the other names for sew foam that you're going to hear is scrim, and that's just probably a trade name. Might have been an old brand. Depending on where you go in the country or the world, there's multiple names for different things, and that's okay. A lot of upholsterers are self-taught, or they learn from an old-timer, or they may have been using products that really weren't designed for the upholstery industry, and they're just reusing them in their craft. And so that's just one of the other names. Scrim, sew foam, it's all the same. Now, additionally, some people prefer to just sew foam the seating area or where your back touches the seat, and they won't do the backs of the seat or the side, the boxing around the bottom of a seat. I sew foam just about everything. And the reason for that is when you have just the vinyl, like on the back of a seat or the sides, you can get wrinkling and stretching, and you'll have an ugly look to it. It won't look nice and smooth. But when you have the sew foam on there, it gives it a little bit of rigidity to the panel, and so your finished product, I feel like, looks in many cases a lot better. It's a guaranteed good look versus when you're just floating it or you don't have the foam back on the sides. It doesn't always look great. Now with the sew foam, it's like a 99% chance you're going to be doing good work with it. So now there's two schools of thought on whether to glue your sew foam or not. Now I prefer to glue it, but I use what we call temporary glue. I just use inexpensive rattle can glue. This is 3M Super 77. And when this heats up inside a car interior, it will soften up. So if there's any wrinkles in the final product, I can heat it up or steam it out, and I can work any of those wrinkles that might have happened along the way. I know a lot of custom guys, when you have big heavy bolsters on the seat, sometimes you have to glue your panels down and use zippers on the back, and those guys will often use their Weldwood Landau top glue, and that works too. Now other people, when you're doing a lot of vintage cars, you might just have a flat bench seat, you might just float your panels. So what you would do is just when you're sewing your seams, you just have the sew foam loose, and that works, and those guys do great quality work. I feel like it's an extra step that I have to worry about my panel shifting, or I get a wrinkle or a lump, and so I prefer not to do it that way. So when I'm gluing my foam, I don't like to overthink it, and I don't like to apply too much glue. And I'm just using the cheap rattle can. It's a little cold in the shop here, so it may not spray that well. And so I'm just putting on a light dusting. Really not doing anything crazy. And it's just going to stick fine. I don't do any of the spraying both sides and letting it gas off. I just put it on there wet. And that's all I need to do to hold it on there. I'm not trying to get a permanent hold. If I was using something like my Weldwood, I got a fresh can here. You can use your Weldwood contact glue also. But this is going to be permanent. If you're trying to pull these apart later with the Weldwood, it's going to rip that foam all up. And so for non-permanent purposes, just whatever rattle can. This is 3M77. I have a can of Loctite. Pretty much I just do a Walmart run and I grab whatever's on the shelf. So it doesn't really matter too much, just to give it a light dusting. So when I'm working with foam, I prefer to perimeter sew all my panels. And this will be hidden in my seam allowance, so you won't ever see this sewing. And all it is I'm just sewing around the perimeter, and it's squeezing that foam together, and it's going to be reducing the bulk. This is a panel that one of my students made. And you can just see how we went from 1/4 inch thick to an 1/8 inch thick or less, 1/16 of an inch. And so when you have multiple seams coming together, it's really going to kind of pre-squeeze that bulk. And it also will help with tear out. You have this extra stitch line here in your seam. And so if you do have a seam that fails, it's going to be a little bit of extra security there. So here I have a demo piece I was doing for a class I was teaching. And on this panel, I used 1/2 inch sew foam on the inserts, and then on the boxing, I used 1/4 inch. And you can see how I perimeter sewed this piece all the way through here, and how the bulk of the selvage there in the seam has been reduced. And so when I lay this flat, now that I've perimeter sewed it and I've trimmed off that extra sew foam, how it's going to lay nice and flat. My hand's right on the back here, and you can't feel that extra selvage and seam there. So perimeter sewing, it really does reduce that bulk, and it's really going to give you a nice final product. One of the added benefits of using sew foam is once you're done patterning on your cushion, you're going to get your covers pretty tight. And then once you add your sew foam, it's going to tighten it up even more. It's going to reduce the inner diameter of your cover, and it's going to fit on there tighter. And it's going to reduce any kind of sagging, any kind of looseness to the cover. But it's still going to compress, and it's going to still install easily while giving it a nice full plump look. Now these are some panels that I was working on for a class I was teaching. And you can see here, this is sew foam in action. And one of the reasons you want to use sew foam is when you're stitching it, you're going to get really pronounced seams. So, I mean, these are a little wavy because it was a class I was teaching. But you can see how it gives you the three-dimensional effect on your top fabric. So if you're doing pleats, you're doing diamonds, it's really going to give you that three-dimensional look. And this is just 1/4 inch. If you want a much taller effect, you're going to be using the 1/2 inch. I wouldn't go much more than 1/2 inch because it starts to become a hassle to keep straight lines. But if you want that three-dimensional look, you absolutely have to use sew foam. So I can do a little demonstration here. This is just 1/4 inch sew foam, 2 layers. I'm going to show you a seam without perimeter sewing. And I'm going to go a little deep on here. I'm going to reverse. Just a 3/8 inch seam. This is my Juki 1541S, in case you're wondering. Great machine. I think I might do a review on it here soon for everybody. Okay. So you can see here with that 3/8 inch seam how much bulk that you get with this foam not being perimeter sewn. So I can do a little demonstration on how to perimeter sew your panels. So this here is just vinyl over 1/4 inch foam. I'm just going to load it in the machine. You can use a guide foot for this if you want. I don't want to set up my machine for all that right now, but I'm just going to ride the outer edge of the foot on the edge there. That makes sense. So I got my machine set real low. I'm going to just lock the edge there. And I'm just using the inner foot to guide. I'm just getting it close to the edge. And again, nobody's ever going to see these, so it's okay if you're a little bit wavy, but you don't want to be walking in and off of the foot. Now I'm just gonna put my foot there. And when you're set up to do this, it only takes 30 seconds, a minute really, to do a whole panel. So it really doesn't add a tremendous amount of labor to your product. But what it does do is it really elevates the final product. So it's definitely worth the squeeze. Okay. So once you have your panel sewn, now I'm going to trim it. So these are just my Kai scissors. And what I do is, first I trim the bulk off. So I'm just cutting this at like a 90 degree on the foam. And again, this only adds about an extra minute for each panel. It really isn't a tremendous amount of time. So once I have it cut to a flush kind of 90, then I take my scissors and I turn them to about a 45, and I will just trim the edge here. And this is just removing the bulk, and I'll show you on top the difference. So down here you have a seam that I didn't trim, and there's a little bit of extra bulk there. But when I do that 45 degree cut, it really removes that extra bulk on that seam. And this isn't something that you need to do all the time. For instance, if you're doing the bottom of a panel, you know, where it's going to wrap around, you're going to hog ring, or you're going to attach your listing, you probably don't need to trim it if you don't have to. I do it to all my stuff. I just kind of got in the habit of it once, and I don't have to actually think about where stuff is going. I just knock it out. And that's it. That's trimmed. So we're going to knock out the other one, and I'm going to combine them in the next video. So I just got finished perimeter sewing both of my panels for this demonstration, and I wanted to clarify what I was doing with the scissors here. So once I cut off my bulk material, then I come back and I cut at that 45 degree angle, and I'm only cutting the foam. I'm not cutting my top material, my vinyl, my leather, whatever that is. And at the 45 degree angle, you're not going to cut out your stitches you just made. They're going to be much higher than the blade. And just go slow, and that's all you can do. You're just trimming out the bulk. So here I got my trim down panel. I just did the 1/2 inch, and I just cut off that seam. And I'm going to just use the other side to show you a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So I got my magnet down here set to about 3/8 of an inch. Got my panels lined up. And I'm just doing a basic seam here. So you can see here, with the 3/8 inch seam, once you perimeter sew, how much flatter the selvage in the seam is there. So once, and it looks like a lot, but once this is installed on the seat, 90–95% of that's going to be hidden. Now, I know a lot of folks like to come back and they like to trim their seam further, and I do that a lot. Sometimes I don't do that. But when you perimeter sew, it gives you the option to not have to always go back and keep trimming all your seams, and then you have. So now that I got the panels attached, I'm throwing down another line for the French seam here. Just gonna make sure it's laying flat. And I'm rushing on this. This isn't like a product for a customer or anything like that. So you can see here, now that I've perimeter sewed them, it's a little messy under here. And then I went back when I got my French seam done, how flat that seam is with the sew foam. I pretty much have no extra bulk beyond the foam itself, and so when you're doing your French seams and you're doing your regular seams, when you do perimeter sew, how much flatter you're going to get your sew foam panels, and how nice everything's going to sit. If this was a real piece, if it was going on a panel, you would not see that extra selvage in there. So one of the things I want to talk about with SoFoam is adjusting your tension. And you don't have to make any significant changes to the tension of your machine once you add SoFoam to the project. So I'm just going to show you a couple quick stitches here on this. This is the practice piece that I've been doing with the seams. And just to show you what we're working with here. So for this, you can tell I have, it might be hard to see, I can see that it's pulling my bottom white thread through the top. On the bottom, it looks good, of course. And so my top tension is probably a little bit high, or I need to adjust the bobbin a little bit, increase the tension on the lower side. But once I get into adding two pieces together, my tension might be fine. So you want to practice with what you're working on, the material. So if you're doing a leather panel, you want to practice with some leather with some SoFoam attached to it. Make sure you got your tension dialed in. So for this, I'm seeing on my red side thread, which is my top thread, I've got a good, bottom looks good. Probably a little bit too far apart for this material on my stitch length, but it looks okay, it's passable. But with 2 layers, I have enough. So when you're practicing your test panels when you're sewing, you want to make sure you're testing what you're actually going to be working with and the amount of layers you're generally going to be working with. For this, I got my tension dialed in perfect for multiple layers, but if I was just doing some top stitching pleats, I need to dial back my top tension a little bit. All right, so next up, I want to show you guys some top stitching on this machine. Now, with my tension from the last clip, realized it was a little bit tight, so I'm just going to back off my top just a few stitches, and this is just a practice piece, so I'm not worried about it being perfect. So I'm going to show you what the difference of a 1/4 inch SoFoam looks like from 1/2 inch SoFoam when you're just doing pleats. And this will kind of apply to your diamonds also, and whatever your top stitching patterns you want to do, just to show you the difference in it. So I'm just going to do, I have marked out about 4 or 5 lines here on each panel. I'm just going to do 2 or 3 just to show you how it affects the material. So I don't actually have my preferred foot on here. I was teaching a class the other night virtually, and I don't have my good guide foot on there, but this will work fine for this. I just kind of eyeball it. So my lines are a little crooked. Forgive me. So I just use silver ink pen on these. If you guys don't know, silver ink pens are the preferred writing material when you're doing your top stitching. It erases with some mineral spirits. You just wipe off those lines. I'm just going real slow here. No need to rush on any of this. And I'm not going to lock my seams here. I'm just going to roll my stitch over. Move that out of the way. And I'm looking at my stitch. I'm still a little bit tight on the top. A few clicks. I can see it pulling my bobbin thread up to the top a little bit, but again, this is just a demonstration piece. When you're doing these videos, you don't realize how much effort goes into them. It's kind of funny how you'll do like a 5-minute video and it takes an hour. It's really time consuming. So if I feel like I'm rushing or I'm okay with less than optimal results, it's just because the effort that goes into these. So I hope you guys appreciate it. Okay. So you can see here the 1/4 inch. You can see how the pleats, they're not huge. They have a nice little roll. This looks great on like a vintage car from the 60s. That's about right for that look for 60s or 70s. Now with the 1/2 inch, I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm just gonna do a couple quick lines. You might have to adjust your foot tension, your foot height with the thicker material, especially when you're sewing multiple layers of like 1/2 inch together. You know, there'll be an inch up there. So if you don't have a tall foot, you sometimes have to compress the material to feed it in and jam it. And so that's why these industrial machines are a requirement. You could try it on your home machine, your domestic like Bernina, but once you get into multiple layers and you got a full seat cover you're working on, it really just doesn't have the oomph that you need. It'll probably pierce the leather or vinyl fine. It's just the weight of everything combined pulling on the machine. You're gonna have lots of problems with needle strikes on a domestic machine. Just trying to give myself enough slack here. My tension looks great for this 1/2 inch material. Your thread material is also going to change the pleat. Sorry, the thread diameter is going to change the texture, how the pleats look. You get more pronounced pleats with a heavier thread with more tension. It'll kind of squeeze the seam where you're sewing it together a lot tighter. I think this is probably, if I had to guess, maybe 69 tex. 90. This is 90 tex. I think this is just nylon thread that I had for some, it was the cheapest stuff I could find for a class I was teaching. That last one. This needle's tearing up my thread. It's time to put a new needle in this. Trim some of this. Now you can see on this 1/2 inch pleats how much more of a roll that has. Probably doesn't come out on the camera too much, but it is a much more pronounced roll. Versus when you're using the 1/4 inch, it kind of gives it a more square pleat look. So there's much more material in the center, so you have a nice roll with these 1/2 inch. And even if you don't do these tight pleats with the 1/2 inch, I mean, it feels like real luxurious. Like if you guys have ever sat in like a plush 60s or 70s Cadillac or Buick, it's going to give you that really nice, good feel. Whether you use 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch, but 1/2 inch is more visually impactful. Hey, you made it all the way to the end. I appreciate you sticking around. If you found this video useful, please consider giving me a like and subscribe. We're just starting out here on YouTube. We're working on this comprehensive video on how to reupholster a bench seat, so we're trying to include all the steps. It seems like you need to watch 100 videos out there to kind of get everything in one place. So hopefully you found this useful. There's going to be more in the series to come. This video kind of started out as video for my online students. We're kind of in exile right now. We kind of lost our place to share upholstery, and so we're here on YouTube sharing it with everybody. So look forward to catch you guys on the next one.